Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions.
Who cared? Back to door. So I'm sitting here and I'm doing the news, and I look up and I see Carl comes in. And I'm the only one in the station, so he comes in, and I just keep reading my news. Comes in, he's got a jar about that big around, glass jar. He sets it down right alongside of me while I'm reading the news. And I look, and there's a big rattler in there. And I hate snakes.
He was alive?
Here I got good. No, he had him in the jar, and I shut the mic off quick, and he says, "That's old Floyd." That's the fun people had, you know. We had fun with them. Why would you think of that? I'll get that and take it in, give it to Norris. You know? But so me and old Floyd sit there and I finish the news. Isn't that crazy. Fun?
That
people
is
do.
crazy.
Another thing that just hits me. I call it small town radio. When you're doing small market, it's so much different. You have to serve everybody with everything. We did birthday announcements. We did birthdays and anniversary for today. We did a baby report from the local hospitals. We had fire departments back before you had cell phones or anything. They're all volunteer. We had a siren for fire sirens so that when little towns around us, like a town like Conrad, Cutbank, and Shelby, the sheriff's office in those different counties, when there was a fire, they would call quick, "We've got a fire." Boom. So we could tell their volunteer firemen out on their jobs, there's a fire going on right now. And so we were the main source for that fireman to get to that fire hall and go. Now, if that doesn't make you feel good that you're a part of the community,
sure.
They needed you.
Yeah.
We tried to have fun with them, but they needed us. Yeah. And so it was fun. People responded to you, you know, whatever you need or wherever you go. And we would report on everything. We would have different news reporters in each town do a little 5-minute news thing. We would do sheriff's reports each day. They're still doing that up there.
Yeah.
Call the sheriff department, like in 4 or 5 different counties. They learned to do a little, well, here's what happened last night.
Yeah, there were 2 DUIs.
We were their daily newspaper.
That's cool.
Well, and people relied on us for all the darndest. Let me tell you a quick example of that. Town west of us called Cutbank, Montana. Then to the west of them is Browning. It's on the Indian reservation. A guy that lived in Cutbank but worked in Browning at a lumber yard. He had fallen and busted up an ankle or something, so he had crutches. Well, he had his crutch in the back of his pickup. Apparently, it was just one crutch. Of all things, he's on his way to work to Browning, and he gets to work, no crutch. Now, who would think of my crutch flew out of my pickup? Who would you think? Would you call your local radio station to help find your crutch? Well, they called us.
Wow.
I'm on the air. Our gals bring it in, say, and I'd have fun with people. I'd say, "Well, we got something going on here, folks." I says, "I need your help. Dick so-and-so over there in Cutbank this morning, he's on his way to work to Browning at Browning Lumber. He got a crutch in the back. Apparently it blew out on the highway. So anybody driving down Highway 2, if you see the crutch, call her." It isn't 5 minutes. The guy calls us from Browning. Not only does somebody find it on the road, they took it to him where he worked. They were from Calgary, Alberta, 200 miles north of us. They were driving down the road listening to us when I brought it on. They looked down the road and here lays this guy's crutch and takes it to him.
That's perfect.
That's small town, small market radio. And again, you would find things like that.
Well, it's like we said, you were a resource.
Yes.
You were really the center of what was happening there.
Yes.
Right? In more ways than most radio stations ever dream of being.
Yes.
So it's
But
you know, it's partly because you're in Shelby, right? You're out in the middle of all, like you said, all these small towns and this, you know, vast area, right? I mean, one guy has a 30,000 acre Angus ranch, right?
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing. I mean, that just had to have been the most fun. You know, you know this because we shared the story with you, but we went to Whitefish a couple of years ago and visited Phil, and he took us to the resort. We're sitting by the pool, and we get to talking, and the people that are sitting next to us, he grew up in Shelby.
yes,
His name was
across
Ross,
the street from
right?
us.
Yeah, literally, right? And they were huge fans of yours. His family, huge fans of yours growing up. And they were telling us all about, you know, how amazing it was growing up listening to you and all that. I mean, you're really, I mean, I know you're too humble to refer to yourself as a legend, but you're really a legend in radio in Montana, and you have a massive following. It's just, you know, I know you don't run into those people all the time, but we do from time to time, you know, and it's really cool. It's really, I mean, it was fun to listen. He turned into a little kid. Like, he's a grown man, right?
Yeah.
And he turned into a little kid telling us
Yes.
about growing up listening to you.
Well, talk about younger people coming back and remembering things. When I came out to that station, we would do a morning swap program.
Okay.
This is, of course, you didn't again have social media. You didn't have any way of communicating.
Right.
People would send in stuff to us, and we would do a 15-minute show with a local hardware store there. At the time when I started, K&T Hardware Swap. So you'd have, you know, you'd maybe have a note, I got 3 cows I want to sell, or I did a pickup, or everything. So we put it on there. And then on Fridays, I changed it where we let people call in with their swap thing. And that was fun, talking and having fun with people, you know,
Absolutely.
but that type of thing. But why did I bring that up anyway?
Well, you know that doing what you did for 42 years had a special place in people's hearts.
Yes.
You talked about anniversaries, you celebrated birthdays, you were a resource when there was a flood. You know, when people had something they needed to move, you were a resource.
Yeah,
every
that's
time,
right.
Every time you turned around,
And
you
doing
were
their
something
ball
for them.
games, you know. Did so many, I don't know how many hundreds of games we did over the years. There was 7 of us that did play-by-play in that little market we had. You don't realize how you become part of people's family if you talk with them. And I didn't always do mornings, but later on in life, when I became part owner, but I was for 26 years the morning thing. In 1973, before I didn't own any part of KSCN at that time, I had an offer to go out to northern Idaho, up in the silver mining country, from a guy that used to work for us. He and another guy had bought a radio station and offered me part ownership to come and program their station, hire the announcers, do what I wanted with it. So it was a nice opportunity, something different. So I announced that I was leaving KSCN. One of our advertisers owned a small clothing type store in Conrad, Montana, where my wife is from. And I got a letter from them. Joe Robbins was his name. He had Robbins and Gust. Still remember this. He says, Bob, we have listened to you for years. We've grown up listening to you at the breakfast table with talking about your family and whatever. And he said, this morning, when you mentioned that you were leaving, my wife started crying. And he says, you become so much of our life. And that really hit me. It's like, whoa, Lord.
Yeah.
Well, you don't realize you become so much part of their daily routine.
Every day.
You know.
You're there every day.
I wanted to get back to my swap program. I'll tell you what.
I like your
because they had a tradition for years of playing a polka in the swap program.
Yeah.
That wasn't really part of the music. The only time you could hear a polka. Now, I grew southern Minnesota where I started, they had stations that played polkas 24 hours.
Sure they did.
Yeah, and today there's still a lot of that polka, Whoopie John, and all these guys. Yeah, but anyway, so that was a tradition. You always had to play a polka.
Yeah.
Well, we played it at about 10 minutes to 8.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people would wait for their school buses. They'd be out and have the radio on or at home, and they'd hear that polka come on.
Yeah.
And later on in life, kids would come back from college and say, "Bob, you know what? We got down to college here and there. We missed our polka." That's like this rock Quincy you're talking to. See, those kids grew up with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It always made me feel good.
Yeah.
We missed the polka.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, it's amazing. You know, it's hard to put into words what an important part of their lives you were.
Yes.
Right?
And
talking to Rock, you got that feel. It wasn't so much what he said, it was how he said it.
Yeah.
Right? He just turned into a little kid from Shelby, Montana that was a huge Bob Norris fan. Yeah. And you become part of their family.
Yes.
You know, you're part of their daily routine, and
it's
that was a cool time to be on the radio and be a huge resource for the people in that area. 42 years, that's something to be proud of, Bob.
Can I tell you a few stupid things
Of
that
course,
I did?
tell me anything you want.
I don't know what I think about it. I know we didn't have any type of format we're going to do here. Okay.
It's all about you.
Back in about early 60s, I'd only been at KSCM maybe a year and a half. My brother-in-law, my future brother-in-law, no, he was my brother-in-law then, and his brother were at Helena, Montana. That was, of course, the capital of Montana. Yeah. And my brother-in-law was a chief engineer at the TV station, and his brother was program director.
Okay.
Well, Jerry, the manager who I became partners with later on in life, he and I were having a feud and movies over a few things and whatever. And I don't know, it was just at a time where I just at unrest. I needed a change.
Yeah.
So I went to work in Helena, and I got down there, and this is 1961 or whatever. Working the radio side of a radio TV combination in a big Quonset building, plus the United Press International. We were all in the same building there in Helena.
Okay.
Well, once in a while I'd wander over on the TV side, kind of watch what they're doing. Look in the control room and wander around. I got to know them. In fact, my first TV thing was sitting here doing this. When you asked me to do this, I got to thinking back, what am I going to talk about with Mike?
Right.
So I made a few notes of this, but this one was fun to me. I just happened to think about it this morning before we got on. I had wandered into the big studio. Everything back then, we didn't have videotape. If you did a commercial, it was either on film or you did it live, or we did it with what's called slides. We had a slide projector. I ended up working in the TV end of it later on. When you're doing a commercial, they bring you a commercial to read live, and on the side of the commercial, it would have what slide you bring up, and up here you'd have the alphabet. So if the slide was B3, you had to do your own. I had to reach up and push B3, and then read while I'm reading the commercial. Then I'd see it was slide C4, so I'd go C4 while I'm trying to be fluent. You talk about archaic.
No kidding.
That was early black and white television, one camera.
Wow. And multitasking all at the same time.
Oh yeah. Well, anyway, of course, I'd work in radio. Well, I went back then. That's when I went back to Minneapolis and visited this Dave Nixon.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, I had a friend of mine that had worked with at the country station, had come into Minneapolis, and they put on a country station, and that's how much things changed in a few years.
Gotcha.
So I went over and visited this guy, Ralph Beeble was his name, and he said, "Hey," he says, "you want to go to work? Here's Minneapolis. You're waiting to get into a big market." Mm-hmm. And he takes me to the manager's office. Says, "This is Mom, blah, blah, blah. He's been here. He'd do you a great job."
Bob Norris from the old Norris and Nixon show, right?
Yeah. So, and this Dave who talked, Nixon, he says, "I'll tell you, that country station is going to go places." He knew it. So I could have been. They were offering. I was making more money out there in little old Montana than what they offered me.
Were you really?
Yeah, and I couldn't. I said, "I'm sorry, I'm making more money than that where I am." You know.
So some things never change, right?
Yeah.
When you were in St. Peter,
yeah,
you made less money than you made in
That's
Shelby.
right, yeah.
And you told them, "Can you match it?" And they said no, and
Yeah,
you went to Shelby, right?
same way here.
You still make more money,
yeah, same
right?
way here.
Yeah.
So anyway, in the meantime, back in Helena,
Some things never change.
no, they don't. So my brother-in-law's brother, Bob, was also his name. He kind of heard that I was looking back there, and he wanted me to come over on the television side.
Really?
So he called me back in Minnesota. He said, "Bob," he said, "when you come back, I want you to work in television with us."
Really?
So I said,
Is that in Helena?
Pardon?
Is that in Helena?
Yes.
Okay.
So I said, "Yeah, well, yeah, I could do that." So I get back. Now, in small town, or in America again, the TV studio, the engineering part of it, you had a console a console is where all your controls are for people back home.
Yeah.
And,
Buttons and knobs
and on that we had, and you had a little monitor that was what your cameraman's looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, we got more cameras, but anyway, so you had to control, and plus, you had a thing called, it was a couple of adjustments you had to make. Back in the old days of television, I don't know if you remember once in a while, they'd get on if the camera would swing on something that had a lot of light, your whole TV set would buzz. You remember those
Yeah,
days?
I do. Yeah, that was a long time ago.
You had
I was little, but I remember.
yeah, that it would do that. Nowadays they have automatic, gain controls that take care of that.
We had 3 channels where I grew up.
You had 3 channels?
We had 3 channels. We had ABC, CBS, and NBC.
Yeah, that was right.
That's what we had.
That's all.
And we were lucky if we had those.
You bet.
Right? And by the way, just so we're clear,
Yes.
I didn't mention this a minute ago, but I'm going to mention it now. I saw the Harlem Globetrotters for the very first time in Blackwell, Oklahoma.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, and they were on their way going up through
You
the
remember
plains.
Goose
They were
Tatum?
headed to you.
You remember Goose Tatum?
Yeah.
Goose was a.
You remember Curly Neal?
Curly Neal.
Curly Neal was there.
dribbler.
Yeah,
Yes.
Curly Neal was
I
there.
know it. Yeah.
I mean, just and Meadowlark Lemon was there.
Meadowlark, yeah,
Yep.
he was
I mean,
a course.
I got to see all those guys.
Oh,
my
yeah,
dad took us to the Harlem Globetrotters in Blackwell, Oklahoma,
yeah.
which was a big deal back then.
Well,
you
it
know,
was.
I mean, that's a tiny town. It's bigger than Shelby is, but
Yeah.
it's a tiny town, and that was a big deal that the Harlem Globetrotters came to
yeah.
Blackwell.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was, and those custom cutters that came up to see you, they went right through our place.
Oh, yes.
And when they come through our place, our farm, they would cut our wheat for us.
Oh, yeah.
We'd ask them where they were headed, and they'd tell us they're headed to Shelby.
Oh, yeah. Really?
Literally, that's where they were going to end their season, was in Shelby.
Yeah. I'll be there.
What a small world.
Isn't that crazy?
And I was 9 years old at the time.
You were
of that
9,
shit,
yeah.
right? I mean, and that was a big deal because, I'm on a farm in Oklahoma out in the middle of nowhere, right? And all these trucks and these combines, these big, beautiful combines and these big trucks, they all start showing up, right? And this thing is like a convoy, man. They've got campers and everything. And they'd set up camp right there on the home place.
Yeah.
And they'd cut our wheat for a few days and then on their way.
Yeah.
And they were headed northbound. And they literally started a couple of years, this crews that we have that ended up in Shelby, they started cutting rice down in Louisiana.
Oh, yes.
In the rice paddies down in Louisiana, they would cut rice down there, and then wheat, and then and they'd go all the way up the plains and end up in Shelby.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
That was custom combine.
Yeah.
There's a number of guys I'd meet in life later on, and I'd say, "Where are you from?" Kansas, whatever. It was a custom combiner.
Yeah.
Yep, came up here, loved it, and came back, met a girl, married her.
Yeah.
Or a lot of other people I met, they'd be from somewhere, in the U.S. somewhere, and I'd say, Air Force, Great Falls, Montana, came back. That's right, they'd say.
Yeah.
Because Great Falls has an Air Force base.
Yeah.
And, let me tell you that story. I also worked in a band for a while.
Yeah.
And we 3 or 4 piece, you know, and Shelby, we played a lot of different clubs. So I'm doing the radio thing. I'd go do a ball game, and then I'd go down and join the guys in the band, you know.
What'd you play?
Till 2 o'clock in the morning. Started out with the big old stand-up bass.
Yeah.
Daddy saying bass, you know.
Yeah,
and,
they got it.
So then I went to the hard body, but sang, and it was kind of the front man, you know. We were fun. We had a lot of fun. But anyway, so one night we're there at Shelby, which is on I-15, of course, goes right into Canada. The reason I say that, there were about 4 guys sitting there at a table, I noticed, and they were enjoying the music and the stuff. We took a little break. Guy comes over and he says, "You're with the local radio station, aren't you?" I says, "Yeah, I am." He says, "I know." He says, "You'll never know how I happen to listen to your station and know your voice." I says, "Nope." He was in the Canadian Air Force, and the Canadian Air Force and the United States Air Force used to join with there was a name for that, for our 2 countries would get together.
Yeah.
And they would come down and do maneuvers with the guys down out of Great Falls.
Yeah.
So he says, when we're coming down to do our whatever they do, he says, I'm at 40,000 feet, and he says, I would have my ADF on. Well, that's called Automatic Direction Finder. Navigation, you can tune in a local radio station, and your needle will point right at that station. And you
Really?
can use it to navigate an airplane.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, this guy says, I listen on ADF. He says, when we're down here, I listen to your station, and that's how I knew you.
Oh,
When I tell that story, I says, I got a guy that heard me from 40,000 feet in the air. He happens to be in those club in Shelby, Montana. Here's my voice, comes over and says, I know you. That's one of my weirdest ones.
That is so, yeah, so so literally you're on the radio, right?
Yeah.
And you're imagining that you're broadcasting out to all these, what was it, 8 counties or some
About 5 counties.
5
yeah.
counties, right?
That's
So
so
you're
the farmers.
right.
on
So
their
you're broadcasting out to
machines.
these 5 counties. You're thinking this way.
Yes.
This guy walks up to you and goes, I was up there and I'm listening to you up there, right? Now all of a sudden you're thinking, who in the world, who else is listening to me, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of expands your world a little bit.
I know we're just jumping all over the place here, but let me tell you about voice recognition, how amazing thing, how our voices are remembered. Later on in my life, also back in the late 70s, I also ended up doing horse track announcing.
Really?
Race announcing.
Really? Oh my goodness.
If you want to hear that story quickly. Look, Shelby had a local 4-county fair each year, but we had horse races part of the county, 4 days, part of the fair, 4 days of horse racing.
Wow.
And that was a big part of it.
Oh, sure.
And of course, a lot of Montanans had, and other states would bring in, we didn't have the big $50,000 or $100,000 horses, you had, But anyway, so we used to broadcast the horse races even. If it moved, we covered it.
I love it.
So we would set up equipment up there in the grandstand on top where the guys doing the track announcing,
Yeah.
the racing stewards, the photo guys. So we would be up there each year with our radio equipment and tape a race. You couldn't do them live because of off-track betting. You'd have to delay them 15 minutes. So I got to know this guy that did the announcing for the races. Norm Amundsen was his name. Big deal. He did it for a lot of years, so all of a sudden Norm tells the fair board, he says, I won't be able to do the races. I'm taking a job over near Spokane, Washington, or in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, bigger tracks. Well, what are we gonna do, for an announcer? So I don't know why Norm thought of me, but he says, get Norris, he could do that.
Really?
And I had no idea. I did a lot of play-by-play,
That's a-
football and basketball and some baseball. So the fair board, in fact, this big rancher is on the fair board, he comes to me. He says, hey, how'd you like to be our track announcer? I said, what?
Yeah,
I said, I'd have to learn it some way.
sure.
I'd give it a try. It's completely different than broadcasting, it's a different ballgame. So I said, well, if I could go visit Norm and kind of watch him and see how he does, yeah, that's fine. So he got a hold of Norm. Yeah, bring him over to Coeur d'Alene. So Steve and his wife and I went over to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho one weekend. Norm, we go to the track. Norm takes me through. He says, I want to show you how they draw for the horses. He takes me into that. I'm on the backside where the horses are. He said, I want you to learn this end of it too. So he did that. So we get upstairs and I'm alongside of him and just watching him call the races. Everybody's got their own little way of doing it. He used a monocle, instead of a
Binocular.
yeah, he just used one. Then he had a spotting sheet. He'd hold it like this and look at that with that eye. He'd look at it. Geez, how am I going to learn to do that?
Well, that's interesting.
So anyway, I watched him for a while, and then he kind of showed me how he lays out the horses and the colors. There's no way you can remember the names of the riders.
Right.
So you do it by color. Each state has a certain color. So red is number one hole, and white, and orange, black, whatever. So I make up my own little spotting sheet, and I listen to Norm for a race or two, and I get my own little tape recorder, and I know I'm not going to learn anything standing here. I got to go find out what I don't know.
Yeah.
So I went clear down the other end of the grandstand. I don't want to be around him where he's talking.
Right.
So I got my own little mic, and I got my own spotting sheet, and I got a program. So I fill out my sheet here, and then I try to do, how to do the parade, which when you bring the horses on. And Norm gave me a few tips on how to do this and that. So then they come out of the gate, and just boom, you're just looking at where do you start even, So I start calling and this and doing that, and then I take the tape back into Norm, and he'd listen to it, and he'd say, well, that's good, you might want to do this, and he'd point out a few things. I said, okay, I'll go back to try it. Yeah. So I did 3 or 4 races, try to see what I could do. Boom, I go back to Shelby in a couple of weeks. I got the fair coming on, 4 days of horse track analysis, and I'm brand new.
Unbelievable.
Well, little ego thing, I got to be pretty good.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.